What's the essence of going to space? I mean, you know how before you do any research, there should be significance or like the purpose of it.
Do you want to go to space? Do you want to go to Mars?
Think something like 20, 25 years after they've started
When the
putting people on
technology
the
is
moon.
better.
I'd love to.
Nevertheless, we haven't found any evidence. My thought is they either do not exist or they are in a different realm that our technology and our understanding cannot even comprehend
Yes.
or even reach to them in the realm in which they are. So
Yes.
we are thinking of physical things.
Yeah.
But probably they exist in Mars, but in a different realm that we cannot even interact with them
Yes.
in the realm in which they exist. So it's either that or they are totally non-existent.
Yes.
Welcome everyone to the Contemporary Science Podcast Show, where we discuss interesting scientific projects, therapies, breakthrough technologies happening across the world. This episode is going to be very nice, very interesting. This is a part 2 of the space exploration episode. And in the first part, we talked about lunar exploration. We talked about some of the programs that have been done. We had the Artemis program. We talked a bit about the Gateway program. Today, we are going to dive a little deep into some of the technologies that have come up in space exploration, and we'll talk about some of the things that people have said and thoughts that we have gathered on the streets from people. My name is Randy E.T., your host, and I'm doing this with...
I'm Sean Murphy, your co-host.
Stay tuned. So we're on the streets asking people questions, and I had some people also send me their responses via text, and some people also talked. So I would read a bit of them, some of the concerns of people about space exploration, the whole project about going to space, going to the moon, Mars, whatever. And I have this person going. She goes by the name Nazira, and so her thought was, or her question was, what is the purpose or the significance of going to space? For every project, there is a significance or a reason. I can't see what the purpose is here unless the purpose of tourism. Otherwise, I don't see the relevance of going to space or what the relevance is for human existence. And I think that is interesting.
Yeah.
And I can imagine a lot of people also have the same sentiments around going to space. People are like, why do we need to go to space? Why all the fuss around it? Yet you have another group of people like me who is so excited about the whole project. But
Right.
What are your views on what Nazira says?
I definitely understand that perspective, but it's because in a lot of ways it makes the most sense for the present now, which is that how is space flight or space exploration going to impact my life positively right now? And because so many people are striving for things and they have their struggles in life, the idea of putting so much effort into something that's completely intangible to them seems fruitless in some ways. But I think that those people are valuable to kind of balance out those of us that are super into it and really want to pursue it. So I definitely get where she's coming from. I think, because, I mean, 99.9% of us will never go to space.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I think this also ties into what we discussed in the part 1, where we were, you mentioned or you asked from your interactions with friends about why people think, why we are putting in so much effort, money into going to space when there are several problems to solve here on Earth. And we dived into that a bit, and there were quite some interesting thoughts that we put out there in the part one. So those are of our audience who are watching or listening through audio platforms, you could look at the part one where we discussed that a bit. But I'll move on to this second person. He goes by the name Alex. And Alex said it will be very nice. It will be nice to see what the challenges would be in setting up humans in space semi-permanently. So like not to put people there to live the rest of their lives there, but to go there and come back. And I would like to go to space, but say 20 to 25 years after the technology has been perfected.
Yeah.
So that was Alex's thought. And so it begs the question, what do you think the interest of people would be generally when it comes to commercial space flight? When that does come to fruition, like people wanting to go to space, do you think it'll be something that would really take off?
I think for many years to come, it's going to be sort of limited to obviously people with a lot of money.
Yeah.
But I feel like a lot of people will be interested because I think it's going to have some element of like roller coaster culture of like it's a carnival ride almost in some ways. But I think for a lot of people too, it will be like a transcendent experience. It'll be like the ability to take ayahuasca, which is like this psychedelic drug that you have this transcendent experience. It'll be similar to that, but in a different way where you get to see Earth from this, macro perspective. And I would imagine that feeling, because what your brain almost can't comprehend that when you're that far above the globe, you're seeing the Earth with billions of people on it, which is such a crazy thing to think that the Earth, once you're separated from it, becomes such a small thing. So I think that it will be really exciting, but this is, hopefully this never happens, but there's still risk for, tragedies to happen. And once one of those happens with, let's say 20, 30, maybe 100 people involved, that's probably going to put a stop to it for an extended period of time, and then it might come back.
Yeah, and that takes us to another point that one of the people who texted mentioned. We will get to that in a bit, but just building on your point, I think it's going to take a whole lot of work to get people to buy into the idea of going to space. Like regular people, not just the scientists or the engineers at NASA, SpaceX, but regular people wanting to go to space. I believe these things will become a reality in generations to come, not in our generation.
Yeah, I agree.
If we are able to see animals going to space and coming back and not having so much side effects, and then we see some of our scientists go to space and come back with very little side effects, probably to push the excited ones to want to go.
Yeah.
And then later on, we'll have the late adopters, as I'll call them. Those who adopt this later would also follow suit. But generally, I think people would like to go to space because of our drive for adventure, for curiosity. I think these things would be what would drive people. But generally, human beings are more prone to going the route of safety.
Yeah.
So if it turns out to be safe, then curiosity and adventure would force us to go.
And as you were saying that, the thought that I just had is like, if you just take normal commercial flight,
Yeah.
for example, if you look at how many people still today don't fly because they're terrified of flying. Space flight is a whole different level. It's way beyond that.
It's not even close.
Exactly. And
it's way different.
if you look at the statistics of flight safety, you hear this said all the time that flying is much safer than driving in terms of the statistics of accidents that happen on the road and fatalities that happen on the road compared to the fatalities and accidents that happen with commercial flight. Driving is far more dangerous in that situation. I think what we inherently feel as humans is that space or flight in general, the consequences of something going wrong, regardless of the statistical reality, the consequence of something going wrong is far greater flying than it is driving. So even though statistically speaking, driving, there's accidents all the time.
Yeah.
The accidents that happen if you're flying are like way...
The tragedy is way higher than when you're driving.
Yeah. I mean, you could get into a serious collision and come out unscathed. You're not getting into even a minor collision in a plane and living. So that the gravity is so much different. That's funny, gravity. But but take that to a whole nother level with space flight.
Yeah. There's this other person. This was an anonymous person who texted. He was asking what are some of its future prospects. So prospects about going to the moon. I think we've dealt with this a lot, both in the part 1 and just these few minutes that we started talking. So I'll move on to the other person. I would say is the last person we will talk about. So he talked about some really, really interesting stuff. And I'm going to read everything he says here, and then I'll get your thoughts on that. So he says, and this is also an anonymous person, he says, space exploration is a very interesting topic. Honestly, however, what are the ethical considerations surrounding space exploration? What is the preservation of celestial bodies or the rights of potential extraterrestrial life? Humans, unfortunately, have a way of destroying the beauty of creation. Also, I am just curious if you came across that in your research. Is there any evidence of extraterrestrial life beyond our solar system? And what missions are underway to search for it? And finally, are there any potential economic or commercial opportunities associated with specific or with space exploration and development? And if there are, what do you guys think it is? Thank you, and looking forward to your next episode.
That's really interesting. I think there's a lot of deep... There's a lot of deep concepts and issues that are in there.
Yeah. We probably may break it up. So I broke it up into 3 parts. We'll talk about the regulatory bodies when he talked about the rights of potential extraterrestrial life, celestial bodies. And so I feel the role of these regulatory bodies, and I'll list a few of them, but I think the role of these regulatory bodies would really, really be essential in preserving and protecting what we see up there in space. Like, there are a lot of these stars and things up there in space. Talking about extraterrestrial life, we have had a lot of programs that we will talk about in a bit, in probably, I will say, the second session of this episode, where we look at the various rovers that have been sent to Mars searching for extraterrestrial life, not just on Mars, but generally in space. So we'll talk about that a bit. But generally, I think these regulatory bodies will play a huge role. And I'll mention a few of them. We have the first one that comes to mind is the Federal Aviation Administration here in the US. And they are the primary regulatory agency for space exploration. They are called the FAA, abbreviated. So the FAA regulates the launch and re-entry of space objects. The FAA also requires commercial missions to receive a license to launch and re-enter. And it requires licenses for commercial space sports as well. I think this is good in like addressing what this person texted. There's a lot of regulations that will go into it, but we also see that regulatory bodies exist in a lot of other sectors of the economy, and yet there are still a lot of things that happen that you wonder if there are actually regulations around these things.
Right.
So it's hard, but I think that is the first step. If you want to have it under control, set some regulations and streamline how things are done. Make it very clear to people. So people know what is happening, right?
I think the safeguard right now is how difficult it is still. So as difficulty decreases, then the need for regulation becomes increasingly more important, because right now it's the laws of physics are regulation in some ways, because it's so costly and so difficult to even launch a rocket into space, let alone, let's say, build a base on the moon, and then in the future build a base on Mars. Those things are, in a lot of ways, still bordering on science fiction. So that is sort of a built-in regulation right now, but as we overcome those barriers, I totally think that there needs to be serious regulation, especially because, and there needs to be a way to communicate with other countries, because as other countries develop the ability to do their own, it's not like SpaceX has the exact same motives as China's space team. They don't have the same motives. And so the most important thing, I think, is that we have to find a way to avoid that type of conflict that results in like the ego battles between these regions, because if we end up in a situation where now we are battling for real estate on the moon, then that's the concern, is that as human history has always shown us, humans can't avoid war, or we can't avoid economic strife and all these things. So it's almost inevitable, but we can right now try to set things in place where hopefully the scientific bodies and the people pursuing this, I think if it starts with a goal that sort of transcends human borders, that will be a better place to be, because if the goal is not just, competition, if the goal is truly like, how can we explore the universe? Because in the scheme of the universe, humanity is just one thing. It's not everything. African, European, Chinese. It's not like that. We're just all here on Earth. So hopefully that's the kind of attitude we can bring to space exploration, but we have to, there's going to be issues with it, Because let's say at some point we discover, oh, there's precious metals up here. Now everybody's going to go, wow, how can I get there and find a way to get those precious metals back so that I can have extreme financial gain? That's going to be an issue, you know.
Yeah, I think we built this point up in the first episode where we talked about how scientists have been able to manage these situations where they don't segregate between this country and that country. Scientists generally try to put these differences behind them or aside and get to the meat of what they are researching is. And that's the beauty of research.
One thing sorry to cut you off, but one thing I just wanted to add and hear your thoughts on is that conflict is so built into us. Like the competition and the I'm different than you and therefore blah, blah, blah. But what's fascinating is that one thing that transcends that is, well, there's a couple things, but one thing that transcends that is curiosity. Isn't it wild that curiosity curiosity is so powerful that it can transcend one of the worst human instincts, human nature? And then the other thing is like religious experience can transcend that too.
Yes. And there's a story that I learned or I saw like a video of it just recently. And they were just talking about human nature. And what they said was, imagine you have people from all walks of life that probably ends up being 30, 40, 50 people, just a small number of people. But among those, that small number of people, you have Americans, Asians, Europeans, South Americans, Africans, all of them represented in that small number of people. And they are in trouble. They are in a certain situation where they have to fight for their lives against maybe a huge snake, a venomous snake, or something that is so dangerous.
Yes.
You realize that at that point, the human brain goes to a point where we do not just think about our differences. We try to be safe. That safety that I talked about earlier. And if that safety has to do with getting another person's help, we don't mind the fact that they are different than me.
Yeah.
In terms of skin color or whatever. The fact that we are both fighting for the same cause, which is our safety, we fight to help each other.
Yeah.
Imagine if you need a way out of that island. Maybe you're on an island and you need a way out of the island. And you find someone who is very good in geography, is able to read maps, could tell and help the team get out of the island to safety. People will not think that I belong to this sect or this group or this party or this country or whatever. The fact that I want to be safe and I find someone in our group who can help us get there, that is what matters at that time.
Yeah.
And this is a very interesting thing when you think about just human nature and how things will play out once this whole space exploration project comes to fruition. Is very interesting to think about.
Yeah.
And I'll just, so talking about this person, I also realized that from what he sent, he's also looking at generally how human beings relate to things they don't know, things that are set a certain way, and by association with that thing, we tend to spoil it. So we look at things like how beautiful the forests and all of that. And then you have people hunting them animals down, cutting down trees, because we want to, because of our civilization, because of the growth of population. So we want to support the population. So you cut down a lot of trees to build houses,
Yeah.
furniture.
Yeah.
You hunt down animals,
Yeah.
for recreation, for zoos and all of that. And then you realize that gradually we are seeing the repercussions of our activities, and now we are trying to avert some of the consequences by making things right. And his thought is, what would that, how would that look like when we get up there in space? That till now is still very unique, untouched, untapped in any way.
Yeah.
And how would human beings relate when we get into contact with these celestial bodies like the stars, the moon? We are on the moon right now. Oh, we plan to get to the moon by next year. We see what happens. But once we get to the moon, what would that look like?
Yeah. There's a couple of things. I think one point that I was thinking about as you were talking is the need for really, really good leaders.
Yeah.
And I do feel that we're in a time right now where really, like, an exceptional leader is somewhat hard to find. I do feel that way sometimes right now.
I think it's not just like, it's globally. I've realized that we don't have a lot of selfless leaders now compared to about 50 years ago.
Yeah, and I think that part of it too is that I think social media has distorted some of that leadership, because right now with social media, you get praised in a certain way, even if you're not the best leader. If you have some, charismatic, skills, or if you have a way of drawing people into you, that is considered leadership, where the best leaders are probably not known. Like, I have no doubt that those people are out there in the world right now. It's just that they're the best leaders, which almost by default they know, I can't be involved with this stuff on social media trying to get clout, because I need to be actually doing my job. And so the good leaders right now are kind of in the shadows, because in order to be a good leader, you can't be investing a ton of time into becoming, like, let's say, Instagram famous or something like that. So I think the need for good leaders is super critical. And the other point that you were talking about with these different viewpoints of, like, what is humanity's role? And there's, like, in the environmental landscape, there's, like, the humanist perspective, which is like, humans are the premier species. They have the right to do what they will with the things here on Earth. And then there's, like, the actual term is kind of like escaping me right now. But then there's another camp, which is like, the Earth is sacred. Humans don't have the right to violate the rights of animals who may have some level of consciousness. And now there's, like, science coming out about, well, do plants have consciousness, or do plants communicate? And so by cutting down trees, are we technically, like, hurting something? And so that is very there's a complex conversation going on just in that. But
Very complicated.
But I do think that humans are special. Humans hold a special place in existence. To, as far as we know, we're the only thing like us in the universe right now, as far as we know. So I don't think that we can reduce it completely down to, like, humans just ruin everything, because that's a nihilistic perspective. That doesn't lead to anything positive.
Yeah, the points that you raise are, like, very interesting. But I was also thinking about the commercial space flight. I was doing a little research, so we're moving on a bit. But I was doing a little research on the cost of these space flights once they become commercialized. I know there would be a point where we would it'll become cheap enough for the regular person to be able to go. But I was researching some of like the prices that have been set now, and I'll just read it out to you and get your thoughts on it. The cost of a commercial space flight varies, but for the suborbital flights, and these are flights that last just a few minutes, probably 15 minutes, you are done. And they go into space, but not so high up, just a few miles above the surface where you could see the earth behind you, and then you come back. And that with Virgin Galactic costs $250,000. When you do an actual orbital flight with SpaceX, it costs $55 million. I think these prices are outrageous.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think it's not a mystery why it's so expensive, because at least in my mind, because it's so just the materials are so costly that and because there is still such like if anything does go wrong, that's also playing into it. But with those orbital flights, I mean, you're in an actual rocket.
Yeah.
And so that alone is a huge thing. And just the team, just everybody who's involved in making sure that happens safely, just think about how many people are having to be paid to make that process happen. So, and also, I sort of I'm okay with it being expensive right now because it limits the amount of people that can do it. And it's almost like I want there to be a restriction, because if it's too cheap, then I think that's when things get a little sideways in terms of people doing it too much. But I should say too much without the proper steps in place and things like that. But the Virgin or the
Virgin Galactic.
Yeah, that I don't think is a rocket, is it? It's just a.
It's like one of these spaceships, like these ones that the military uses to in the air.
It's like a very powerful plane with.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So, but it's able to go very, very high up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know the number of people it's able to carry, but generally I still think they're expensive. Like the points you raise are genuine points, but if you're looking at it from a commercial perspective,
Yeah,
even with a limited number of people, I mean, I know that a lot of money, resources go into this, like putting even teams of people together to make this happen. And all of these people need to be paid in some way. And so the cost generally shouldn't be cheap. But to pay $55 million to go
insane.
to space is insane.
Yeah, it's insane.
Even $250,000, these are that is for the suborbital flight. And so imagine you are going up and coming down within 10 minutes. And within that 10 minutes, you lose $250,000. I mean, it's a great experience. It's once in a lifetime experience. But once it becomes commercial, you could go any number of times you want. Just like I could just get on a flight and go to California or Texas and come back within the same day, actually. I could leave in the morning at 10 a.m. and by 2 p.m. I'm back,
Yeah.
depending on what I'm
And
going
you
there
would
to do.
spend
So,
and you would spend legitimately 1,000 times less money.
yes,
More
like
than that, but
yes. So, saying we're going to the moon, going to space
Orbit or
and coming back for that amount, we'll see how it will turn out. Let's move on a bit to some of the technologies that have been invented or manufactured just for this project about going to space. And I'm very, very excited about these. When I was looking at the latest rovers that have been sent to Mars, which is the Perseverance rover. And we'll talk about that a bit. But before we get into that, I would like to just mention some of the rovers that we have seen or other technologies. So the first among them that human beings put together were the rockets and the satellites.
yes.
So
Yes.
we had the satellites up there for communication purposes. And then as time went on, we started adding several other things in there to, as it were, learn about space, not just for just communication purposes, but also to learn about the other stars and bodies, the planets in our solar system, which is good. And we had very good, massive, powerful rockets that launched these things up into space. And we had telescopes as well. And I'll tell you an interesting story. So, this was in Ghana, you would say in junior high school.
Okay.
So in junior high school, we did this project where we had to build what are they called? Periscopes.
Okay.
So these periscopes are used to see above obstacles, and they are used mainly in submarines. So that's what helps them to see the surface of the sea while they are in the submarine. And we had to design some of those when we were in school as a project. I really enjoyed it, like to be able to put together those things. They have
It's got the mirrors and stuff.
yeah, the
Right,
mirrors in the 90-degree place, 90 degrees at each other. So I designed mine, and a couple of friends also did theirs, and I would see on top of my roof at home. So I would stand and I'll keep pushing it up and up and up and up. And I would see on top of my roof. I was so excited. I felt, man, I'm a scientist. I'm an engineer.
Yeah.
And even then, I didn't know I wanted to be an engineer. I had other dreams, but
Right.
now I think about those things. I'm like, man, this I've been doing this since then, right?
Yours.
And so when I was looking at these things, when I researched on them, I came across a telescope, and then it reminded me of that, and I was so excited.
That's awesome.
To do that. But yeah, these telescopes, and we're talking about telescopes just before we started this episode about the James Webb, and you were sharing that most people think they're on Earth.
Yeah.
I shudder to even think about it that way.
Yeah. So, yeah, what's fascinating, and, there was a point in time where I, too, thought, because, there's a few observatories even here in Arizona, but one of the most popular observatories, or I shouldn't say popular, because probably, it's in Hawaii, but so it's somewhat difficult to get to, but that's one of the most amazing observatories there, where, you go and you can see into space, like it's insane. But so I was thinking, when I would visualize the Hubble telescope, which is kind of the most well-known telescope that would capture these deep space images, I always pictured it here on Earth.
Yeah.
I pictured this gigantic structure with these huge, like a telescope the size of this room with these massive glass lenses, and robotic components and stuff, somewhere on Earth. And then I realized that these telescope, or the Hubble, and then its next in line, which is the James Webb, they are launched into space. So these telescopes are deep space telescopes. They get placed onto a rocket. They're configured almost like a satellite, and then they're shot actually not into Earth's orbit, but they're shot into deep space orbit where it orbits the sun. And that's how it's able to capture these images of legitimately galaxies, capture images of, the Milky Way, black holes, stars that are being born, that are, according to the professionals, millions of light years away, which is hard to understand. And one thing maybe we can touch on it at some point, is these metrics that they talk about, how these metrics just get thrown around, like that star it's a picture of a star that's 10 million light years away. It's like, what does that even mean? You know what I mean? So, and is that number real? Like, is that a real thing, or are we just accepting this because I don't know how to calculate it? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, those telescopes, they're in space, which a lot of people don't know.
Yeah. And so these are very fascinating things to even think about. Talking about what these telescopes are used to do, it's amazing. Just recently, we got pictures for the first time of a black hole from the James Webb telescope, and it sparked a lot of conversations on the internet, where we had people talking about it a lot. And when I looked at the pictures, I'm like, man, I can't believe I always thought that we knew how these things looked like. And you see, the way the education around these things go, it's almost like we have it figured out, but we don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've not taken human beings to space, not even to the moon, aside the very first moon landing.
Yeah.
Which there are a lot of controversies about anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the way we talk about these things, the uneducated or people would probably think that there have been several people up there in space, but literally there is nobody.
Yeah.
Nobody has been there.
In like the grand scheme of things,
Yes.
it's so few people.
And we and I was just sharing this with you earlier on, where we tend to describe the things in terms of videos and pictures of how things look like in space, but we really haven't seen it. And the picture from the James Webb telescope that showed us a picture of how the black holes look like. When I looked at it, I'm like, wow, this is interesting to even realize how these things have worked over the years. But moving on to what you mentioned about some of these metrics, and I'll touch on that a little bit. So, have you ever considered how people or how these ships that sail on the sea are able to tell how deep the sea is?
Yeah, I mean, I have some. I mean, I have just no understanding of the mathematics behind it, but I have some understanding of.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a
There are these sonars
imaging
that
device.
they use.
Sonar is one of
Yes.
them, and then I'm sure there's some other, sort of things that they send some type of frequency and then it returns.
Exactly. So that's what they do. So there are these sonar devices on the ships, and they send these high frequency waves deep into the sea, and it hits the seabed and comes back up like a reflection.
Yep.
And so these sonars
And the time it takes.
Yes. So with the mathematics involved, we're able to calculate the time it takes to go down, then comes back. And we know how fast we are sending these frequencies.
Right. Yeah.
We know the time we receive back the frequencies. And so with those parameters, we can calculate the distance.
Right.
And so these things help us to know. It is the same idea that is used with reading or gaining like pictures of babies in the womb.
Mm.
They use the same sonar, but the technology is a little different, but the idea is the same.
So like what so with space, like with the light years, so my rudimentary understanding is that we it's sort of a collection of variables, right? So we understand the speed, we know what the speed of light is. That was like one of Albert Einstein's like big discoveries. So we know what the speed of light is, and we know how to sort of, as like light is no longer just this ethereal thing. It's an actual like, it's an energy source. It has some, it's not matter, but it has some tangible relevance now.
Yeah.
And so we're able to, if we know the speed of light, and we know like, and this is where it gets confusing for me. So we know the speed of light, and so we're capturing this image. So we're doing some calculation that says this light took this long to get to us, and therefore, if it took that long, we know how far away it is.
It's so confusing,
Yeah.
even to scientists. And
Yeah.
so because of that, there is a strong or a big distinction between the studies of these things. There is what we call quantum physics that studies these things. It studies matter in the very, very minute level in terms of lepton, quarks, that level, like the smallest level,
Yes.
and study the nature of these things. And the nature of these things then helps us to estimate or to understand how the these bodies in space work. And we also have the classical physics, which is what we do here on Earth, like how things move on Earth, calculating the speed of a car and all of that. That is much easier to do, easier to understand. And there are physicists who operate in this realm that do not get too much into quantum physics because the equations and the understanding of these things are so deep and a little different from each other.
That's what's wild about this whole scientific journey is that, we now know that Newton's laws begin to, let's say, break down at certain scales.
Yes.
So at infinitely small scales, like what you were talking about with the quarks, which is the innermost part of a atom, it's what's inside of, let's say, like a neutron or something. Those quarks, the way that those elements behave is different than what we understand as normal physics.
Yeah.
And I would imagine that at insanely large scales, things begin to change as well. And so and I think what you were kind of touching on earlier, just a moment ago, is that some of this is discussed as fact, but it's not fact. It's theoretical. That's why it's like when you hear people talk about it, it's always a theoretical physicist who's talking about it.
Yeah.
It's never like just the basic mathematician. And I think there's truth in these things, but I do I don't get frustrated, but I'm aware of the fact that some of these discussions, there should be sort of a preface of, we don't know this to be true. This is what we're speculating.
Yeah. I agree with you. I agree with you a lot. But we'll move on a little bit to the technologies that we mentioned.
Yeah.
And I would just list out some of these rovers. And these rovers are basically robots that are doing these things. So NASA sent a number of them. We had the Curiosity rover, the Twin Spirit, and Opportunity rovers. We had the Sojourner rovers, etc. But we currently have the Perseverance rover, which is in space, is in Mars as we speak. It was sent there in 2020. So the mission that it went there with, the name of the mission was Mission 2020. And so it was sent to Mars in 2020. And the work, or what it was supposed to do, is to find out about the geology of the landscape in Mars.
Yeah.
Take pictures of those, and other things like finding if there's any trace of life,
Microbiome type stuff.
microbiome stuff up there in Mars, and generally those things. Also finding out water places and all of that. And there are very, very nice pictures I have seen. What fascinates me is the quality of the pictures. It's so good, so good. And these are some facts about the Perseverance rover, and I'd like to get your thoughts on that. First off, what fascinated me is the sheer size of these rovers, especially this one. I drive a Toyota Corolla, and this rover is way bigger than my car.
Yeah.
When I see the pictures, even like before doing this research, the pictures that I see, it portrays it as like something very small.
Yeah, you think it's small.
When you look at it, you think it's just a few feet. But when I research it, and I'll give you some of the data that I've seen, that it's in length is about 11 meters. 11 feet. That is just a little shorter than my car. But in terms of the height of it, the what is it called? The height and the width, it's way, 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 way longer. I'll just try to find it here a little bit.
Yeah, as you do that, it's super fascinating what goes into building these things. And I even have a perspective of it doesn't give it justice, the intricacy that these things have, because for one, the public, even though that they build these things and there are some pictures of it, I think something that happens with me is it almost doesn't seem real. I sometimes question, like, is this a picture or is this an illustration of the rover? And sometimes the images of Mars too, I'm like, is this an illustration or is this a picture? Like, is this actually captured, or is this some thing where they're like, this is what it would look like if, so, and I think a lot of the general public experiences that, and I think that's a pretty common obstacle to overcome in terms of getting people on board, is that there's still this level of, is this stuff even real? Because it seems so far out to believe that there's legitimately a man-made rover on a different planet. But I do believe it's real. It's just hard to wrap your head around that.
Yeah. I would get to, so I also had thoughts like that, and so it led me to ask the question, how do they send these things to Mars? Like, what is the process
how
of
it is
taking it to Mars?
Yeah.
And I found a little something online that seems plausible to me, that I'll read out to you a little bit.
Yeah.
But just going over the what I was saying about the size of these rovers. So it's about 10 feet in length, about 9 feet in height, and if you look at that, it's so big. It's even amazing to like wrap your head around. it's amazing to wrap your head around. It's 9 feet wide, 7 feet tall. If you think about it, so what I did to like get a good perspective of these values that have been mentioned, I literally took a tape measure and measured
Right.
my car. So I measured my car from the back all the way to the front, and my car is about 14 feet in length, and so this is 10 feet, so a little shorter. But when you look at the height and the width, then I realized the sheer size, like it
Yes.
could house 4 or 5 or even 6 people
Yes.
in the rover.
Yes.
It's amazing.
And part of that, it makes sense, right? Because if you're building a machine that you want to be able to collect soil samples, then analyze the soil samples somehow, and then the logistics of, okay, how is it being powered? Well, obviously it's being solar powered. So then all of the mechanics that have to go into the battery pack is probably a huge part of the overall form factor of the vehicle, is just the battery pack itself. And then whatever deployable solar device that they have that probably is not out all the time, but can be extended and retracted. Then you have, as you put in some of your notes, this Perseverance rover, I think, is the one with 23 cameras on it or something.
Yes, 23 cameras.
Yeah. So, we're filming with a camera right now, and we have, just this equipment here. And imagine trying to put that on a vehicle that you're going to send out in space, right? It's insane. The engineering feats that go into manufacturing something like this.
This is like amazing when you even think about it. And just as you mentioned, I was just about to talk about it a little bit in terms of the size. The instruments, there are about 7 instruments, some measuring the depth of the things beneath the ground.
Interesting.
Very deep into the ground.
Yeah.
Using radar technology to measure what are some of the things that we could find. And not just like we could get pictures from them.
Yeah.
That aside, you're able to about things concerning like air quality and all of that are all measured using this rover. So it has, generally, according to NASA, it has about 7 instruments. It has 23 cameras, which is mind blowing. What they are doing with these things. But
Doesn't it make you in a lot of ways want to be a part of something like that? Or like imagine being a part of that team that's actually developing something like that.
It's crazy. Like these people who work at NASA, not just NASA alone, SpaceX and the other countries that are developing these things. These scientists, mathematicians, computer scientists, engineers, all of these people, I believe that working on this thing alone gives them so much sense of pride of doing something that is worthwhile.
Yeah.
It's hard to see what the results are now, but just doing something like that, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So talking about the point that you raised about how all of these things are calculated and how they are done, I did a little research into how exactly does NASA launch these space rovers? And what I found is quite interesting. So this is what they said. So there is the preparation stage, the transport stage, the launch, and then how the rover is sent into Mars. So the rover is assembled and tested in NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena in California. So they have a lab there in California. Now, once they test the everything they call it JPL, which is their lab. Once everything is tested, it's transported to Cape Canaveral in Florida. That's where the propulsion happened, where they send it to space. So that is a transport, and then they launch the rocket in space. In Cape Canaveral. At the time when they launch it, it gets into orbit around the Earth. At a point where the mathematics shows that at this point, if we launch it, it would be able to meet the planet Mars in its orbit, such that it's able to meet it in line.
Yes.
So while the rocket is in orbit, it's ejected. The rover is ejected at very, very, very high speeds.
Yeah.
Into or towards the Mars planet. When it gets there into the atmosphere of Mars, ejects the parachute, and slowly it falls onto the surface or the land in Mars.
Yeah.
And by doing that, it's able to safely get from Earth to Mars. And once again, immediately gets there, it starts filming.
Right.
So it sends radio waves. And I don't know how exactly they do this, but it sends radio waves to the satellites here, orbiting the Earth. And that radio waves are converted back into pictorial forms. So the pictures that we see are constructed pictures or reconstructed pictures. So they don't send actual pictures. They are waves that are sent because of the distance.
Yeah.
And they are reconstructed again. I wonder how they do that.
That's so, even with basic photography, it's always kind of been a mystery to me. Like, how does that work? Because it's one thing to be like, oh, it just captures the image, but
how exactly?
And so the way that a basic camera captures an image is that light and the way it reflects off of different surfaces, the way that those photons then interact with, let's say, a image sensor is what ends up creating the image. So light coming off of our skin, light coming off of this red thing, those light photons are behaving in a certain way. The image sensor, then each little photon that's behaving in a certain way, the image sensor then is at each microsecond interpreting that data, and then it converts it into an image.
Every pixel.
Yes.
So it's amazing.
The way
think about it that way.
Sending that image through radio waves now, that's insane.
That's a different ballgame.
That's insane.
It's a different kind of mathematics that goes into that.
It almost doesn't seem real. It's like, because then when you see the image and it's a real thing, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, like that rover is really there right now in this landscape. It's got that rock is there, and we're seeing it, and it's been transmitted however far that distance is. One thing that I wanted to say about about, as you described, how that rover gets to Mars, and how you described the orbit. And so one thing that I think a lot of people don't know is that this time frame, you can't just launch stuff to Mars at any point in time. At least right now we can't. It's about every 2 years that this opportunity presents itself, when we can essentially slingshot something using the gravitational force of Earth's orbit, and slingshot something so that it then can linearly pass to Mars. That opportunity is only about once every 2 years, I believe. So in terms of future civilization on Mars, that's a really interesting thing as well. Like, okay, if we do end up ever sending people to Mars, those people will go and travel to Mars, and they're not coming back essentially.
At least 2 years
For
after.
at least 2 years, yeah.
That's,
Assuming that
that's-
we can even manage to get them back, you know.
Yes.
So
that's an interesting thought. So talking about how these rovers communicate back to the Earth, it will interest you to know like some of these things that I found. So it says that Mars rovers communicate back to the Earth using radio waves, which I already mentioned. The rovers have two antennas. They have the high gain antenna and the low gain antenna. The high gain antenna is used to communicate to the Earth when the rover is in direct line of sight with the Deep Space Network, the DSN antenna. So the low gain antenna is used to communicate with the Earth when the rover is not in direct line. So this is what happens. The DSN is a network of radio telescopes that are located around the world. The DSN antennas are used to receive and transmit radio signals from the spacecraft that are in deep space. So the rovers communicate with the Earth using X-band radio waves. X-band radio waves are types of radio waves that has a high frequency and very short wavelength. I think that is what allows it to be able to be transmitted over very, very long distances without attenuations. So they are used to travel for long distances, as I mentioned. So this is interesting.
yeah,
Like
certainly.
the fact that our technology has developed so well that we can send information from one planet to the other, and it's the same thing that goes into trying to find extraterrestrial objects or living beings
Yeah.
in outer space, trying to hear from them. It's amazing thinking about these things. And I was discussing this with a friend just yesterday, and I sent a video to you, a short funny clip to you on Instagram.
Yeah.
Remember? And
Yeah.
it's still like I still laugh when I remember that video. But we were discussing the very same thing yesterday with a friend of mine, where I was asking him, or he was asking me, what I thought about how our technology is and the fact that we are going out there looking for these aliens, right? And he said, so what happens if we find them? Then what? And his question is, have we given thought to what we will do if we find them?
Right.
And we don't even know how they look like, what they do. Like, we don't know anything about them. So if you find them, are you going to bring them on Earth? Like
Right.
how, just like in the video I sent to you, that was quite funny to think about. But yeah, so it just calls to question, why the fight to find extraterrestrial life? Why?
Yeah. I think, I think it's fun and humans, I think we sort of long for something to be out there that has equal to or greater capacity than we do. I think even though that we inherently view ourselves as the dominant species, and pretty much everything we do is to maintain that dominance. And I think back to our previous point, which is, some of our concerns about how we operate as human beings and the damage that we do cause at times because of that view that we're the dominant species. But I think there also is a part of us which is very interesting that we have this sort of this dichotomy between knowing that we're the dominant species, but also longing for something else to be out there.
Which
Because
is better than us.
yes, because and I think that that is there's also something in us too that, for a lot of people, the belief that there's a deity, a greater being that exists that has created all of this. So I think the alien thing for some people is a bit of a manifestation of wanting there to be some superior being, and for some people that's God, a singular being. The Greeks believed that there were multiple beings that transcend humanity and have this ultimate power. And then on the extreme side of the alien people, I think they wish that there was the aliens out there, these other physical beings that have omniscient power. And I don't know what that is really. I don't know what that deep-rooted desire for something. I think when that's a testament to just how complex our mind is. What I'm more fascinated about, aside from, let's say, because I am somewhat evidence-based in the way that I approach things, and I think right now there's very little evidence that there's intelligent beings.
We've not found
anything
so far. Even with the rovers we've sent to Mars,
there's
and
nothing.
all of that.
I do believe that there could be life, though, outside of Earth.
There could be, except we've not found it.
Yes, but I don't think I have serious doubts that we'll ever find intelligent life. I think that because biology is a thing, I think that if the chemistry is correct, or what's interesting is right now there's no evidence of other biological existence outside of Earth. But what will happen is when humans go to these places, we will by default transfer biological material to these planets. Then what happens? That's what's fascinating. What happens if just a simple spore gets to Mars? What changes might occur? And I think that's where some of these science fiction movies and stuff, they're capitalizing on this unknown of what happens if something that humans bring to a different planet begins to evolve. But what do you think? Do you think we're the ultimate exclusive being with the highest intelligence, or where are you at with some of that?
Yeah, so I also like to look at these things just like you, with the basis of empirical data. I also know that there are a lot of things that we are unable to explain here on Earth. Some things that I would say spiritual things that happen that we just don't know how to explain them, but they have happened before our eyes. We have evidence that they have happened, but we can't explain them with science. I understand that. But that aside, I believe that if we can't explain some of these things, there is no reason to keep going at them and believing that they exist, especially for this extraterrestrial life that we are looking for.
Yeah.
You see, the mere fact that our solar system alone has so many stars, We have 9 planets. There are several others that are not part of this solar system.
Yes.
But in our solar system alone, we have 9. And you ask yourself, how come and why is it that Earth alone has life,
Yeah.
it becomes difficult to think that we are the only ones here.
Yes.
Thinking about that, like,
Because it
looking-
doesn't make sense.
it doesn't make sense. Why these grandiose things here, and yet only Earth? And Earth is not that big in comparison
Correct.
to the several others that we have out there, the planets that we have. So I understand people when they think about it or talk about it in that way. Nevertheless, we haven't found any evidence. My thought is they either do not exist or they are in a different realm that
Yeah.
our technology and our understanding cannot even comprehend
Yes.
or even reach to them in the realm in which they are. So
Yes.
we are thinking of physical things,
Yeah.
but probably they exist in Mars, but in a different realm that we cannot even interact with them
Yes.
in the realm in which they exist. So it's either that or they are totally non-existent.
Yes.
That is my thought on that.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking about, I just recently, I've been hearing a lot about UFOs of late, unidentifiable flying objects.
And, yeah.
There is a lot of noise about what is your take on that?
You know, I do think that a lot of the unidentified flying object talk it's conspiratorial,
Mm-hmm.
and if anything, I believe that it's probably military stuff that's just highly classified. And that is like best case scenario. What most of it is, though, is probably just, as humans, we make mistakes. Our as powerful as our minds are, there are flaws. There's things that we see that we misinterpret, and a lot of people want so badly for these things to exist that when something does trigger that line of thinking, they're immediately convinced that that's what it is. It's a similar let's say phenomenon that happens in court cases where a person is so convinced that that's the person I saw, that's who did it.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out, no, that's not the person. And that is one flaw with humans that we have.
Yeah.
I think one thing that you triggered this line of thinking that I've been processing, which is that in science there's at times a conflict between spirituality and just fact, right? And like with humanity, there's the evolutionary perspective, and then there's the creator perspective. And quickly, the evolutionary perspective is that Earth just happened to have chemical and biological foundation that allowed a single-celled organism to then proliferate and evolve over millions and millions of years into a multicellular organism, and that multicellular organism then became various organisms, which then became the various species that we have on Earth, and then our most common ancestor is primates. You know, as much as that likes to be conveyed as fact, it's not. It's if you ask legitimate scientists, that is still 100% theoretical.
Mm-hmm.
It just is. That's why it's called the theory of evolution.
Yeah.
So this is not fact. It's got some good basis. We see evolution happen in organisms even during our lifespan. Organisms change. Humans have evolved in different ways. And then the other side is like this. There's a deity that created humans, and the Earth and this experience that we're having is profoundly unique because some all-powerful thing created it. And I think I lean more towards finding, I think that it's a mixture of the two. I think that there's unique scientific things that happen, and I think that there's powerful things which science will never be able to explain.
Yeah.
And I think as we discover more and more out in space, I wonder, as we realize that there's only one Earth out there in the infinite universe, I wonder which camp will become.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I like this conversation, like this trajectory we are going on. We probably could spend another episode discussing
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
because it's very controversial, and I would like to hear from actual scientists.
yeah.
Actual scientists, their thought on that as well, and then also hear from the regular people on the streets what their thoughts about it is. But at the end of the day, it will all come down to belief systems,
Yeah,
religious beliefs,
yeah,
and religious beliefs are strong beliefs. Like, if a person has a certain religious belief and they are devout, it's so difficult to get that idea out of their mind. So that is one. And then there are the scientific beliefs, and then there are those who don't really care and go with whatever people say.
Right.
All of these things. But on the subject of space exploration, which is what this episode is about, I think we are running out of time, so we'll probably be drawing the curtains soon. But there is this interesting thing that I found on the NASA website that I would like to get your thoughts on as a way of ending this episode. It's called Send Your Name to Mars. Very interesting. And they've been in the business of doing this for a couple of years, by sending these rovers to Mars. I don't know how they do it, but so far they have, for the next mission that will be coming up, they have over 23 million names or reservations that have been done or have been put into their system, and it keeps being updated every day. So what people do is they buy a ticket, just like flying in a plane. You buy a boarding pass, you buy your ticket, you send your name, your full name, or however you want it to be written out when it's sent there. And once the mission comes up again the next time, they send these names to Mars. And I was looking at it, it's like very, very interesting to me. So you have first name, last name, location, postal address. And I was thinking, where are these people coming from? Like, what are the places? You have everywhere across the world, almost like everywhere across the world, there are people sending out their names. That you could see the maps here. Very interesting. The places that it would fascinate you to know that the country, and I would like you to guess, the country that has the most names sent to be taken to Mars. Just guess at the top of your mind.
I mean,
It's definitely not the US.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. That would want to. So who they have the most names out of the population being sent to Mars? That's interesting. I have no idea. I would think maybe, like Sweden or something.
It's China.
Really?
So the Chinese are sending their names to NASA to send to Mars.
Okay.
They have 4 million. Over 4 million. The US follows with a little over 3 million. So that's almost a 1 million gap. So it tells you how much people are vested in this. At the same time, like for the fun of it, you would like to send your name there. But generally, you realize that for the fun, I would like to send my name there. But to go there myself, right, it's a whole different ball game. But it's a very interesting thing that they are doing.
And, I keep bringing this, I don't know why, but I keep bringing this conversation back to like a deeper thing, but I think that touches on something deeper, which is that we all want to have our names written in history.
I was
right?
also here. That kind of thing. Like I've also been here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Back from my high school days, when we are graduating on our last day, people write their names on things.
Yeah.
So it's a bad practice that we used to do, but just the fun of doing it. So we write our names on the wall in the classrooms and things, and then we write.
Especially when you're younger.
Yes, you write your name and you write, I was also here.
That's funny.
So some years later, when you come back, you find your name and you're like, yeah, I was here.
That's
but
like
the ends will get painted over. Yeah, generally.
That's. Did you guys in Ghana? Did you ever do time capsules?
Not really.
Okay.
Not really.
Are you
We had
familiar with
different-
like what it
no,
is, or
no.
so time capsules? Like they've done it. I think in elementary school we did one. It's like you might put like some writings, you might put, names, you might put a couple little items into this capsule and then you bury it.
Oh, and then you come
then
back several years later.
Let's say
to
100
pull it
years
up.
later, somebody digs it up and sees, this
Almost
is
the
what
same
people...
thing that people have been doing. Yeah. It's interesting. Anyway, I think it's been a very interesting conversation we've had.
I think so.
But all too soon, this all time will allow us. And so, very interesting topics that we discuss here. We have several others that are lined up for you. If you are watching on YouTube, please, we would like you to subscribe and thank you for spending your time with us. If you are listening through the audio platforms, we would like you to also follow us on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, on Spotify or other platforms. My name is Randy E.T. and your host, and I've been doing this with
Sean Murphy, your co-host.
Thank you.
Peace, guys.